They used electricity to rewrite minds, froze people, and built human hybrids. These real experiments were never meant to surface. Deep in the frozen reaches of northeastern China, during the chaos of the Second World War, a facility operated under a name so ordinary, it could have belonged to a postal office Unit 731. But this wasn't a warehouse or a research lab for crops. This was a place built to study what no sane mind should ever dare test. It was a fortress of horrors, where science was stripped of humanity, and men in white coats abandoned their morals behind locked steel doors. Unit 731 was run by the Imperial Japanese Army, disguised as a water purification unit. What actually happened inside was so disturbing, it remained a government secret for decades. Behind its concrete walls, prisoners, referred to coldly as logs, were used in live experiments. Not simulations, not dummies. Real people. These tests weren't meant to heal. They were designed to push the human body to its breaking point, and then go even further. Victims were exposed to frostbite so severe their skin turned glassy white and shattered like porcelain under touch. Others were sealed in pressure chambers or injected with strange substances just to see how long they'd last. And perhaps the most haunting of all, vivisections. Procedures done with no anesthesia, just quiet footsteps, surgical gloves, and the chilling echo of a scalpel hitting the tray. Even the doctors admitted later that the screams were unbearable. They claimed it was for progress. But progress toward what? One of the creepiest facts? No one was ever prosecuted for these crimes. After the war, the researchers at Unit 731 handed over their data to the Americans, who were more than happy to collect information about biological weapons. Some say they were even protected. That's right. Men who had operated on living humans were quietly moved into scientific programs in other countries, vanishing like ghosts in lab coats. And yet, pieces of this dark puzzle remain. In Harbin, China, the ruins of Unit 731 still stand. Tourists say the air feels heavier there. Locals avoid the area after sundown. Some even claim to hear footsteps echoing through the hallways. Despite the building being empty. Creepy? Absolutely. But it's real. If you ever thought science was all about lab rats and test tubes, Unit 731 will change your mind. This wasn't just unethical. It was a nightmare disguised as research, and the worst part is, we'll never know how much of that nightmare still lives in the classified files no one wants to open. It started with a simple ad in a newspaper. A few college students paid to participate in a psychological study were randomly assigned to roles, guards or prisoners, in a mock prison built in the basement of Stanford University. No one expected what followed. In just a few days, things spiraled out of control. The guards, ordinary students with no history of aggression, quickly adopted disturbing behaviors. They began shouting, humiliating, and mentally breaking down their fellow classmates. The prisoners, stripped of their identities and forced into submission, began to lose their sense of self. Some cried, some refused to eat. One even had a full psychological collapse. There was no physical barrier keeping anyone inside, no chains, no locked doors. But what the experiment showed was more terrifying than restraints. It revealed how easily people fall into roles when given authority or forced into submission. The man behind it all, psychologist Philip Zimbardo, let the study continue until day 6, when it was supposed to run for 2 weeks. He ended it only when an outsider, horrified by what she saw, insisted it had gone too far. To this day, the experiment is debated. Was it proof that power can corrupt anyone? Or was it poorly controlled theater that got out of hand? Either way, the footage exists, and it's unsettling. Young men screaming, others standing silently, letting it happen. No blood, no violence in the traditional sense, but the psychological damage was obvious. Zimbardo later admitted he had also become part of the experiment, slipping into the role of prison superintendent instead of a neutral scientist. And if that happened in a controlled university basement, what could happen in places without rules at all? During the 1970s and 1980s, deep inside South Africa's military hospitals, a disturbing program operated in near total secrecy. It was called the Aversion Project, and it specifically targeted young male conscripts who showed romantic or physical interest in other men. In the eyes of the apartheid regime, this was not simply a private matter. It was labeled as deviant and something to be fixed. What followed was not therapy. It was a cold and calculated attempt to erase a part of a person's identity through pain and manipulation. Conscripts accused of such behavior were quietly removed from their units and sent to psychiatric wards. Once there, they were subjected to what was officially called behavioral correction. The methods included electroshock sessions that paired certain visual triggers with sharp, repeated electrical jolts. The purpose was simple: train the brain to associate certain feelings with fear and discomfort. In addition to these sessions, some were forced to take hormonal treatments. A smaller number reportedly underwent surgery designed to alter their physical chemistry permanently. There are accounts, many still under investigation, of procedures being carried out without clear consent, often on young men who barely understood what was happening to them. These weren't isolated events. This was a system. A structured, well-funded campaign to force people to conform to one accepted mold. The man believed to have led much of this work was later nicknamed Dr. Shock. He continued his medical career for years before eventually being prosecuted in a separate legal case. But the full scale of what happened during the Aversion Project has never been officially acknowledged by the military in full. What makes this experiment so haunting isn't just what was done, but how it was done. With clinical precision, state approval, and a belief that controlling someone's mind and desires was a form of service to the country. And while much of the world has moved on, the memories remain locked in the testimonies of those who lived through it, and in the documents that only a few dared to open. The line between medical science and control has never felt thinner than it did there. Until perhaps the next case, one where the human mind itself became a battlefield. For years, whispers of a secret CIA project spread through conspiracy circles and late-night radio shows. Many dismissed it as paranoia until the documents were declassified. Project MK Ultra was real. It wasn't a movie script or urban myth. It was an official operation that aimed to do something previously left to science fiction control the human mind. It all began during the Cold War, when American intelligence feared enemy powers were using psychological techniques to brainwash soldiers and prisoners. The CIA decided to fight fire with fire and launched a program designed to unlock the most hidden corners of the brain. But the way they did it was what turned MK Ultra into a lasting symbol of secrecy and ethical failure. Across universities, prisons, and even hospitals, individuals were unknowingly subjected to psychological experiments. Some were kept awake for days. Others were hypnotized, isolated, or fed misinformation to see how their behavior would change. These weren't harmless tests. Some participants remembered nothing. Others remembered everything and couldn't forget. One man described it as watching his personality unravel like thread. The public only found out decades later, when boxes of documents were uncovered, almost by accident. What they revealed was a patchwork of unregulated tests and shadowy funding, tied to fake foundations and front organizations. And here's the strange part: many records had already been destroyed, allegedly in the 1970s, under orders from inside the agency itself. What remains may only be a fraction of what really happened. Even now, MK Ultra is referenced in everything from Stranger Things to pop albums. But behind the pop culture nods is something very real, a moment in time when the limits of the human mind became a government target. What else might have happened behind those walls is anyone's guess. It sounds like a scene from a dystopian thriller, but it happened in plain view, without the public knowing. In the early 1950s, the US Navy carried out something called Operation Sea Spray. The goal? To understand how a biological agent might spread through a major city if used in war. The target? San Francisco. Without alerting a single civilian, military ships off the coast began spraying a bacterial mixture into the coastal fog. Over the course of several days, that fog rolled inland, coating buildings, seeping into ventilation systems, and drifting through neighborhoods. It wasn't just a small experiment. It was designed to simulate a full-scale attack, using unsuspecting citizens as test subjects. The bacteria used were believed at the time to be harmless, but later investigations found that the strain, Serratia marquescens, was not as innocent as officials had claimed. Shortly after the test, local hospitals began reporting rare infections. One patient even died under suspicious circumstances. Still, the operation remained classified, and the public never knew why. Years later, documents surfaced confirming that sea spray was just one of many similar tests. Other cities were exposed too, including New York and Washington, D.C. In some cases, particles were released inside subway systems to study how fast they would spread through underground air currents. The public was never told. No consent was given. What makes Operation Sea Spray so chilling isn't just the science. It's the casual way in which it unfolded. Everyday people walked their dogs, opened their windows, and took deep breaths of air that had been laced with a military experiment. No warning. No protection. To this day, debates continue about whether the operation caused long-term harm. But one fact is clear: the US government tested how biological warfare might work by running the simulation on its own people. And if that happened in the 1950s, who's to say what we haven't learned about yet? You've probably heard the creepy story. Volunteers sealed in a chamber, pumped full of gas to keep them awake, turning into something less than human. It's one of the most famous horror tales on the internet. But what if we told you that while the story itself is fiction, the inspiration behind it wasn't entirely made up? Back in the mid-20th century, Soviet researchers were deeply invested in unlocking the secrets of the human brain. And one of the areas they pushed hardest was sleep, or rather, how far you could go without it. In remote facilities, scientists reportedly subjected subjects to prolonged wakefulness, using various mechanical and psychological techniques. Not folklore, actual research. Subjects were observed under extreme conditions to study everything from decision-making to mental breakdown. While the experiments didn't involve gas chambers or monsters scratching at steel doors, the real studies were unsettling in their own way. Soviet scientists believed that sleep deprivation could unlock hidden cognitive abilities, or drive the mind to reveal truths it would otherwise keep hidden. In some cases, participants went for days without rest, slowly descending into confusion, paranoia, and hallucination. Reports mention fits of laughter, panic, and even temporary amnesia. The official documents are sparse, but there are whispers that some of these studies didn't stop when the subject began to suffer. Instead, it was seen as part of the data. And while these tests weren't designed to harm, the lack of oversight and the desperate Cold War race for psychological superiority meant that ethics often took a back seat. The line between science and legend gets blurry here. Some believe the creepypasta version of the Russian sleep experiment was a way to express what couldn't be said out loud, a fear of unchecked science in the hands of secretive powers. And let's be honest, it's easier to talk about fictional horrors than to confront real ones carried out in sterile labs with clipboards and stopwatches. In the American South, under the hot Alabama sun, hundreds of men signed up for what they thought was free medical care. They were told they'd be treated for bad blood, a vague local term used to describe fatigue or illness. What they didn't know was that they were stepping into one of the darkest chapters in American medical history, the Tuskegee study. From the 1930s to the 1970s, U.S. government doctors observed the effects of untreated syphilis in over 600 African American men. Around 2/3 of them had the disease. The rest served as a control group. None of them were told their true diagnosis. And none of them were actually treated, not even after penicillin became widely available and was known to cure it. Instead, these men were monitored. Notes were taken, tests were run, all without their informed consent. They were promised help, but what they received were checkups, false reassurances, and the occasional aspirin. Even as the disease progressed, the researchers held back treatment, because the whole point of the study was to watch what happened when the illness ran its course. Over the decades, some of the men grew seriously ill. Others passed away. But the study continued quietly until it was exposed in the media. The backlash was immediate. Public trust in government health programs collapsed, especially among minority communities. Apologies came years later, but by then the damage had been done. What makes this study so chilling is its scale and duration. For over 40 years, the subjects of this experiment were not informed participants. They were misled and used. And while no physical cages held them in place, they were trapped all the same. By lies, manipulation, and broken promises. Even today, the word Tuskegee carries weight. It's brought up in conversations about medical ethics, trust, and how easily science can be used to serve interests far removed from compassion. The truth is, the scars from that experiment didn't end with the final report. They still echo in the halls of public health institutions to this day. In the mid-2000s, deep inside several UK laboratories, researchers began creating what they called cytoplasmic hybrids, early embryos formed by combining human DNA with animal egg cells. These were never allowed to grow, never implanted, and were destroyed within 14 days. But even with those strict limitations, the mere concept of crossing species boundaries sparked fierce debate. The goal was to create stem cells for studying diseases, but to the public, it sounded like something out of a sci-fi thriller. The reality was technical and tightly controlled. But as with many such experiments, rumors began to swirl. Some claimed the labs didn't just stop at embryos. One story suggested that researchers in an off-the-record facility had gone a step further, attempting to push a hybrid to more advanced stages. A few insiders, speaking anonymously, described something unlike anything they'd seen. Hunched, muscular, reptilian in posture with human-like eyes. What you're seeing now could be a dramatized version of what might have appeared under the laboratory lights. Whether those rumors hold weight or not, the ethical questions raised by these experiments are real. Critics feared this research could lead to more ambitious hybrids, creatures with unpredictable biology and no clear place in science or nature. Supporters argued the work was vital, offering insight into treatment pathways for neurological disorders and genetic conditions. They insisted the line had not been crossed, but many weren't so sure. Since then, several countries have moved to ban or severely restrict similar research. But some believe the work never truly stopped, just moved out of the spotlight. Because when the boundaries of biology start to shift and curiosity meets capability, it's not always easy to know where science ends and something else begins. During the Second World War, inside a German military facility in the town of Dachau, researchers conducted experiments meant to test human limits in extreme cold. Officially, these studies were designed to help downed pilots survive freezing temperatures. Unofficially, they turned into something much more disturbing. Test subjects, most of them prisoners, were plunged into tanks of ice water. No warm-up time, no insulation, just immersion, often for hours, while scientists observed reactions: shivering, pulse rate, muscle spasms. Some were then forced to endure rapid rewarming techniques, including boiling baths or body-to-body contact, to see what methods worked best. The point of these tests wasn't recovery, it was measurement. Researchers wanted to map exactly how long the human body could survive before losing consciousness. Some test subjects were left in the water until their vital signs flatlined. The cold, the silence, and the stopwatch ticking in the background turned the lab into something more like a chamber. What makes these experiments especially disturbing is how structured they were. Tables were kept, charts were drawn, all under the label of survival research. But survival was rarely the outcome. And decades later, the very data collected in those sessions sparked debate. Should such information gathered under cruel conditions be used to help future medical treatment? Or should it be locked away, a record of what should never happen again? Today, the ruins of those test rooms still exist. Some are preserved as memorials, others are shuttered, sealed, their walls holding onto a silence that still feels heavy. It's a reminder that not all scientific progress comes from curiosity. Sometimes it comes from cruelty disguised as inquiry. Before MK Ultra became the poster child for secret mind control programs, there was another operation quietly unfolding behind locked government doors: Project Artichoke. Unlike later efforts focused on memory, personality, or information extraction, Artichoke had one question at its core: Could you program a person to commit murder without them even realizing it? This wasn't a movie plot. It was a real CIA program launched in the early 1950s. Its purpose was chillingly specific. Find out if someone could be turned into a weapon. The kind of weapon that walks, talks, smiles, and then, on command, pulls the trigger. All without recalling a single step. Officially, the documents used more clinical terms like control, involuntary actions, and amnesia. But once you strip away the jargon, it was about building human tools for assassination. The methods tested were deeply psychological. Subjects were put through hypnosis, memory disruption, isolation, and pressure sessions designed to fracture the mind and rebuild it in pieces. Some tests involved layers of suggestion, commands buried so deep in the subconscious that the person wouldn't act on them until a trigger phrase was spoken. And when that moment came, the theory went, they'd carry out an order they didn't even know was inside them. Whispers from inside the intelligence world have long hinted that the program's more successful results were never officially documented, just passed along verbally, or locked away in unmarked drawers. Some believe that certain unexplained political incidents during the Cold War may have had links to early artichoke experiments, though no direct evidence has ever been found. Whether those theories are fact or fiction, one thing is certain. Project Artichoke wasn't just about understanding the mind, it was about bending it, reshaping it into something that could kill on command, quietly, automatically, like a switch being flipped. And the scariest part? If it worked, you'd never even know. In the aftermath of a massive US hydrogen bomb test in the Pacific, a cloud of radioactive fallout drifted unexpectedly over the Marshall Islands, remote coral atolls with populations that had no warning and no protection. What began as a nuclear detonation soon turned into something far more calculated. The islanders were not evacuated right away. Instead, they were studied. Officially, it was called Project 4.1. The stated purpose to observe the medical effects of radiation exposure on human beings. But the problem wasn't just the exposure, it was the timing. Internal documents later revealed that plans to study radiation effects on civilians existed before the test even took place. It raised disturbing questions. Was this simply an accident that became an opportunity? Or was the fallout expected all along? The people of Rongelap and nearby atolls were exposed to the white dust of radioactive ash as it fell silently from the sky. Children played in it, thinking it was snow. Days passed before medical teams arrived, not to evacuate immediately, but to examine. Blood samples were taken, bodies photographed, symptoms documented in chilling detail. These weren't test volunteers, they were islanders, farmers, fishermen, families. The long-term effects were devastating. Many developed severe health problems. Generations later, the region still suffers elevated rates of illness and environmental damage. And yet, the full findings of Project 4.1 were kept from the public for decades. When the documents finally surfaced, they painted a picture of a study that walked a fine line between observation and exploitation. What makes Project 4.1 so unforgettable is the scale and the silence. A population unknowingly exposed, then watched like subjects in a field lab. It wasn't done in secret bunkers or hidden compounds. It was done out in the open, on tropical islands under the sun, where the only warning came too late. That's about it. What experiment would you do if there were no restrictions? Write in the comments. For more useful information, watch other videos.